Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheimer. Today, we're discussing the impact that trees have in urban settings, and in particular in the great city of Houston, with our special guest, Barry Ward, Executive Director of Trees for Houston in Texas. And Barry, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Mark. It's an honor to be here.
So, first of all, I love Houston. We were talking before the show about all the great arts organizations, the great businesses, the sports teams, a terrific and diverse culinary scene. And so I want to talk a little bit about trees because, we all take trees for granted until we walk down a street without them.
That's exactly
right?
right.
Vegetation for granted until there are no more parks, right?
Yeah.
So if we're going to live in urban settings and we're becoming increasingly sensitized due to climate change to the floods and how that works, we're becoming increasingly sensitized to the fact that all of a sudden there are no birds anymore because heat are causing species to move and so on. Talk a little bit about sort of the impetus for Trees for Houston, how you were founded, and what your programs are today.
Yeah, so I'll start by saying that's an astute observation. It's often how we sell our mission. So back in the early 80s, a few affluent, influential attorneys saw exactly what you described, a slow degradation, sometimes not so slow, degradation of urban green assets. And they honed in on trees and so decided they wanted to do something about it. And for 15 years or so, more than that even, they got very good at planting very well organized, orderly, architecturally rendered plantings in high net worth neighborhoods. And they were doing good work, expensive work, and they just didn't have much interest in expanding it too far out of these beautiful, orderly street tree plantings. But they did yeoman's work, and most importantly of all, they got the organization going. And then in and around 2007 or so, they were having a sea change could just kind of be sniffed on the wind. And they found me via a search, although I was already in Houston. I'm not a tree person by academic background.
Well, you were the executive director of the Texas Battleship.
I was. I'm a historian by academic training, and my career started in an art and history museum in California. So I have a varied nonprofit background, but based on the feedback, they brought me in based on ability to wear a bunch of different hats, manage projects, manage small business, of course, fundraise. I very quickly certified as an arborist, so I had some topical knowledge. That was the easy part. There are plenty of people who already know all about trees. I don't need to be the next one. So they brought me in based on that skill set, fundraising, expansion. How do we make this a pan-demographic solution or amelioration, at least to the urban sprawl problems of Houston?
So let me just sort of break in there, because you've made a couple of points I just want to shed some light on them. First of all, the impetus for this was very much about certain neighborhoods, probably where these attorneys were living or adjacent to where they were living. And they basically made a very, very cold-blooded calculus. Those neighborhoods, the property values are going to go down if there are no green spaces.
That's exactly right.
Right?
That is as succinctly and well put as it gets. It doesn't mean that the work was bad for some reason, because that was the impetus. That to me is a neutral impetus, right? A neutral motivation. But the fact is, we can apply that calculus to every neighborhood.
Right.
And what
the entire city of Houston, right?
That's exactly right. And what I've always believed, and now the science and the data proves, is that there are a myriad of other benefits besides the financial that come with it. Better water, better air, better microbiology, better macrobiology, better psychiatric health, lower instances of respiratory illness, things. This is all data driven. It's not.
Shade,
Exactly.
just shade. You know,
And,
when I'm
and
walking and it's high summer and I'm perspiring like crazy because it's Houston, it's summer,
right.
right? I want some shade for goodness sakes.
Right. And even outside of the shade, a very one of the simplest ways to look at things that are green, trees in particular, is it's not just under the shade that it cools it. Everything that is alive and green has chlorophyll. That used to be heat energy. So every blade of grass, every leaf on a tree, every speck of algae in the ocean would have been pure heat just rolling around in the atmosphere if it weren't for
Right.
those living things. So there's a tangential reduction of heat even when you're not in the shade of the tree, and that is significant. And then there's a cascade effect. That means you use less energy and spend less money on cooling, which means you have less pollutants and less volatile compounds in the atmosphere. And it's you get the cascade effect in the opposite direction than what we've been doing. So we're applying that. I will still plant the nicest neighborhood in Houston gladly if they want to pay for it, and I'll help them with that. I'll help them do it better. I'll help them do it cheaper. I'll help them do it with native species. I can improve that as well. But what we brought to bear is a genuine effort to plant everywhere. And so we work very hard. We are project driven. We are not a policy organization. We work on projects. So I
You're
raise
not a
money.
political organization, right? I mean,
No,
this is the thing that I think is so important to understand, that when you talk about self-interest, if you view it as my house, my street, right, you end up with perhaps a start, right? And then you start to look at that and you say, wait a second, what about adjoining streets? What
right.
about adjoining neighborhoods? What about the entire city? And then you start to look at what is going on, and all of a sudden, what you end up having happen is you have a commitment to a civil society that then redounds to your own personal interest, but it is not selfish anymore, right? It starts off with an analysis and perhaps a selfish act that is
Right.
a good act, but then that act can expand, and that's what you're describing. I think that's kind of wonderful, isn't it?
It is, and it's interesting. Your opening observation that everybody likes trees, but they just assume they're always going to be there. It's what we talk about all of the time here. It's like the drought issues in the West. Everybody just assumes you're going to have water until one day you turn on that tap and the water's gone. Trees are the exact same way. They are enjoyed. It's like public radio or public television. They are enjoyed passively by 90% of the people. Right. So until they're gone, until your neighbor clear cuts their lot, or until building code allows for devastation of a once verdant neighborhood for pecuniary reasons, then all of a sudden they become important to you because they're no longer there. So one of the first ways that we drew people into thinking about it as a web rather than linear was we started planting elementary schools. So I plant 50 or 60 schools per year in the greater area at no cost to the school, right? And so I started thinking, well, I grew up in Stockton, California. I walked to school every day for 13 years, right? And we had shade trees. And it gets hot in Stockton. And here in Houston, there are often no trees. So I would be planting the schools, and it's easy to raise money to plant a school. But I thought, okay, all these kids are walking to school and it's miserable, right? So I thought, okay, I'm going to start stretching the money out. And instead of planting 40 trees on a school campus, I'm going to plant 25 strategically. And then I'm going to take the other 15 and I'm going to stretch them out on the blocks surrounding the school so that you have a webbed network a spider web of shaded streets for these kids to walk down. And when if their parents pick them up, the parents can park in the shade in the afternoon and maybe not have to keep their cars running for the heat, that sort of thing. So when you start to think about these things as part of a spider web, as part of it, rather than a dot on a map, it has the effects blossom They aggregate, and they do a bunch of things for the psyche. I know it sounds kind of like warm, fuzzy nonprofit claptrap, but it's so true. It's profoundly true. I'm a data-driven person, and quite simply, it works.
So when you were doing this, were you primarily serving public schools or independent schools, or how?
Primarily public schools. I'll happily do private schools. I do a lot of charter schools when they're available. If it's a school,
You'll do it.
and they ask me for trees, I'll do it. No questions asked. They're on the list and they're going to get their trees. We do it for every nonprofit in the greater Houston region. If a nonprofit comes to me and needs trees for a project, I give them the trees, no questions asked, because their mission is books or education or counseling or whatever it is, not trees. My mission is trees. Let me do it. I can do it cheaper. I can do it better. And let your dollars go into the mission that you were founded for.
So as you're doing this, the organization must have changed. And in particular, when you go beyond the wealthier neighborhoods, which I presume are, because of the way wealth is divided in this country, are very often divided along majority white neighborhoods, black neighborhoods, and different other neighborhoods. I'm assuming that as you're going beyond the wealthier neighborhoods, that all of a sudden your organization changes, your staff changes, the way people are interacting with each other, the community meetings must have changed. I mean, if a group of lawyers who must have had a reasonably good income to start this thing off, I'm sure that group of lawyers looked different, had a different life experience, were different ethnicities than the people that you're serving now. So talk a little bit about how that change happened, because one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is that people are just basically solving a problem. They're going about their business. They're going about taking their sensibility and translating it. And over time, as they think about how to extend that sensibility to embrace other people, you do have social change happening. You're not in the social change business? Well, yes, you are, right?
Right. Yeah, it's you described it perfectly. In 1983 through 2000, 2005, it was and I'm not trying to be provocative, but it was 100% affluent, white, well-educated organization. Right. It doesn't mean they weren't doing good work. And you're exactly right. I never set out to change the makeup of the board, but I did say, well, we need to plant more trees, and therefore you should plant them where they're needed. And although we have all this great data and research now that shows that a survey of financial equity, racial equity, all of those things will help you direct where to plant your dollars. But it's exactly where we were planting anyways, because all you had to do was drive around. You see which neighborhoods need it, right? And they are historically black, historically Hispanic, historically.
Well, and you're solving a problem and you're helping your neighbor. Now,
that's exactly right.
If you are a white person and you don't have any black friends, and your neighbor happens to be black, that neighboring community happens to be a black neighborhood, all of a sudden, in order to take that idea that you might have had, you actually have to sit down and chat with somebody who you don't necessarily chat with. And that is also happening in reverse, right? All of a sudden, the barriers, who is this white person coming in, right? What you're doing is you're getting together over a problem. How do you get trees around a school? Yeah. And everybody wants their children.
One of the fascinating aspects of this board change and internal culture change is that as we bring on people that look different from each other, old and new, there is not always, but there is often a learning curve on both sides of the issue, because people realize that everybody that looks like me doesn't think like me. Everybody that looks like they came from a traditional African-American doesn't think the same way. They all have opinions and wishes and desires and hopes, and they can be different from each other.
Jewish or Christian or Asian or Hindu or all these differences that we have. Republicans and Democrats, oh my God, how different, red and blue, right? Ridiculous. We all have the same problems.
They're absurd and they're arbitrary when you get right down to it. But everybody, well, not everybody, but most people like trees. So these changes came about kind of organically, kind of not. So what I needed, I worked to get a board that just couldn't write checks. I said, we have a large board and we have room. So I said, well, why don't we get people that can get me entree into neighborhoods that I don't have credibility or knowledge of? So that immediately met people that look different from me. And it's been great, slower than I like, but still positive, still moving forward. And we plant all over the place. I was quite happy when like the Arbor Day Foundation and American Forest, some of these outside organizations started doing outside studies in the major American cities on equity and where you needed to plant. And they were very concerned that organizations like us weren't planting anywhere but already wealthy neighborhoods. And when we overlapped their geospatial data onto where we plant, we are very progressive. We're way ahead of the curve, and we're doing it for the right reasons. That's where they need trees. That's the only metric. That's the only metric.
I think that's a very important point, right? The idea of serving the already served starts to break down when you have good intent, you match that intent with action, you get people involved, and you start to change yourself. And then you have the data to communicate out, hey, look, this is the direction we want to continue to go, help support us. So how do you deal with some of the financial challenges? Because one of the things that I'm very concerned about is the fact that with money comes an agenda, right? With money comes priorities. Money gains access, even to buy a ticket to art, right? To gain access to art, there is money that is required. And the fact is that to run the organizations, to plant a tree, to even put together the team and to buy the vegetation and to prepare the land and so on and so forth, it all takes money, right? So it's easiest to do that if you only serve those people who have money with an interest in their neighborhoods. How do you shift that sensibility so that we are together investing in us rather than investing just in me?
Yeah. So it's actually quite simple and quite practical most of the time. The variables change from project to project, but if somebody wants to come in with public affairs dollars, marketing dollars, it's Acme Corporation. Houston is full of oil corporations, right? Energy corporations.
Right.
And many of those people are well-intended and they're doing all this for the right reasons, but you can't escape the fact that this is marketing money, right? They're getting a tax benefit from this, and this is marketing money. So if they come in and they want to they want to give me $100,000 to plant trees, I tell them this is where we need to plant. And if they say, well, we want to go down by the university, well, in some ways it's made easier because that's already all planted. But if they insisted on it, we would, and we have declined the gift. It's too easy to raise money for trees, to take money for trees that are not helping. And so that problem, in a sense, solves itself. But you have to have a commitment to doing the right thing.
Well, that's, it's so very important, right? Because, I'm a capitalist. I've run companies. I've been employed by major corporations. I've worked with leading service providers, accounting firms, and so on and so forth. I'm a capitalist. But capitalism doesn't solve every single problem. Nothing does, right?
Right.
So there is this piece of being a human being, which is really about caretaking, values, values that come out of religion and ethical traditions and so on. And it's separate. It can be informed by other aspects, like the idea of financial strength and service to a mission. But what you're saying basically is that there are times when it's money or mission, and you have to choose mission in order
Yes.
to have the identity in the community that you have.
Yes.
Right?
Profit taking, to use a capitalist term, profit taking in the short term is not
Will
always
undermine your identity, your brand.
that's exactly right. So it's not uncommon. It doesn't happen every day or every week, but several times a year we turn down significant high profile projects or partnerships because they will undermine the value of our brand, to put it again in a modern business term. And what that means in terms of people, of the boots on the ground, is that the trees are going to die. They're not going to look good. It's not the trees that that neighborhood wanted, or that they value and the look they want, or that will make them healthier and happier. And so we say no thank you, and they try and twist our arms. They try and go politically around us, but we're independent. I don't spend a dime from the government. I'm 100%. I'm not subject to political pressure in the same way. I'm subject to board pressure, but a good, healthy, diverse board insulates you from that kind of pressure. I have representatives from all over the area and all across the demographic spectrum, the economic spectrum. So if the cadre that's from the richest 3 zip codes really wants something done, I've got a cadre from the poorest 5 zip codes that can offset that. And so
I think that is such a fantastic point. That is
right.
Such a fantastic point. I deal, as you do, with really passionate, intelligent, high-powered people, right?
Yeah.
People who are used to getting their way.
Yeah.
It doesn't always align on income. Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes these people are very, very powerful politically, or they're powerful in their community. They're advocates of various types. They're professionals of various types, and some people are people of wealth as well. The best results are when, even though those people are impatient about talking with somebody with an opposing view, when they actually do that and they argue it out and they come to some sort of a solution that meets the requirements of the different sensibilities as opposed to a unitary sensibility. Don't you find that to be true as well?
It is 100% true. And if in the end, most of the people won't get 100% of their way, which is life. It is progress. It's how we move forward. But everybody walks away thinking they were heard, right? And that's all you can ask for in a boardroom. That's all you can ask
for. Or in a marriage, right? Or in a
right.
partnership, or in a community, right?
Exactly.
You listen to other people.
And so, back in 2008, not surprisingly, I got some pushback from certain quarters that I wasn't just doing beautiful street trees anymore on beautiful neighborhoods. Well, I kept doing them, but I was doing other things as well. And so the result of that friction point and the tension there has resulted in, 600,000 trees in the last 15 years. If you're willing to take that intellectual friction and turn it into movement forward, you take that energy from the static to the kinetic, then you've done something right. And all I am is maybe just a little bit of a shepherd. There are people all throughout my day who are smarter than me and better than me at everything we do. And 9 hours out of 10, I am the least important person in the room. But if I can just keep those people at a friction point that doesn't grind to a stop or doesn't break apart, then we've done our job and we move forward.
I love this story. I'll give you one. I just talked the other day with somebody. I did a search years ago for a huge performing arts center that was going to be built. And I came in on the heels of a board break where people were so passionate. Some people wanted to go one way, some people wanted to go another way. And whichever way you went, you would have alienated them. So half the board left. And the person who I was talking to the other day, who was my client at the time, said that they had lost a $5 million grant over this whole thing. And there was a specific person who I had talked with at the time, and I talked with since. He said, years ago, I 2 or 3 years ago, I went to an event with him and so on, and he was introducing me around. I was thinking, what's going on? He pulled his $5 million and, was upset and so on and so forth. And he said, this person who runs a major international corporation took him aside and said, you know something? I was wrong. You've done a great job. And the relationship was repaired, and what happened subsequently. But what we're talking about is basically, it's not always easy, right? It's not always easy for you end up with 600,000 trees as a result, right? It doesn't mean that you were always right, or somebody else on your board was always right or wrong or whatever. It means that sometimes you have to go through these processes in order to move forward, and then you keep your contacts, right? I'm sure that people who've argued against you in the past, there are those types of instances that are very similar to what I just relayed.
There are, and it's very gratifying in a wholesome way, very gratifying. So,
and there are probably times when you also have to go to somebody else and say, hey, look, I was wrong.
Absolutely. You will never move the mission forward in a meaningful way if your goal is to keep people happy or just keep your job. There has to be risk. There has to be. You have to try things that are untested or underfunded or difficult or out of somebody's wheelhouse. It's the only way to move forward in a meaningful way. I could have taken this job and kept it as it was, and it would have been great. We'd still be planting 1,000 trees a year. It'd be great. But we're going to do 70,000 trees this year. What we've accomplished, and it's just, again, there's no false humility here. I'm just a facilitator. That's all I do. But you have to be willing to risk your reputation, your ego, your feelings every day. And in those early days in particular, every one of those momentous decisions was a job risk. You can't come in and say, okay, we're changing all of this with a powerful, wealthy board and just expect half of them to just say, okay, do what you want. Most of them, if not all of them, they're smarter, they're more accomplished, they're wealthier than I am, right? And so you just, if you believe in your ability without believing in your infallibility, you're going to do okay.
Yeah, it's interesting. Hubris affects us all. It affects me, infects you, infects your board members. And the idea of listening respectfully, because on the off chance that somebody else might be smarter than you in some way, and that you have something to learn from them, it's a really important part of this whole constellation. You know what my favorite piece of this is that this is a city in Texas, Houston. It's a rapidly developing city. It destroyed a lot of its natural landscape, and it's trying to recover it and finding balance in this new world of floods and climate change and so on and so forth. The fact that it is a center for the oil and gas industry, which is blamed for a lot of climate change, right? Some of these solutions are going to come out of places like Houston. Right. Yeah. It's Houston having a dialogue with itself, and people changing their own minds from their own analysis. I think we have to give each other a break. We have to give each other time, and we have to give each other the opportunity to plant another tree. Right, Barry?
That's exactly right. One of the great things about planting trees is that one tree makes a difference. Cut down the tree in your front yard and see if it doesn't make a difference, especially in a place like Houston. And then collectively, there's a cubing effect of when you do these things. So the benefits of tree planting are just tremendous. Our big challenge, when I first started this job in 2008, it was a much harder sell. Tree planting to solve problems. And unfortunately, there are people out there who'd have you believe that tree planting or whatever its green cousin du jour is will solve all of our problems. They won't. We populated and developed our way into these problems. You're not going to get out of it without engineering solutions and business solutions. Right. But so you need to ignore or take under cautious advisement the voices on the far right and the far left on these issues. Take what's valuable in those strident arguments, but keep in mind that they are strident, and there's room in the middle to move forward.
Listen to everyone, be held hostage to no particular interest. Barry Ward, Executive Director of Trees for Houston and Texas. Thank you so much for helping us to understand some of these really interesting topics. It's not just about trees, it's about society, it's about neighborhoods, it's about bringing people together, it's about solving problems. We really appreciate it. Please thank your staffs, your board, your donors, your volunteers, your partners. This has just been a wonderful conversation.
Mark, thanks for the exposure. I hope everybody takes something away from this that helps them improve their place just a little bit.